The following presentation is brought to you by Discovery Education, leading the world of digital and video learning. Discovery Education, connect to a world of learning.
Get ready for an archaeological expedition because Assignment Discovery is entering uncharted territory in Mesoamerica, a history of Central America.
First, we'll explore the complex capital of an ancient civilization in Tenochtitlan, Aztec City.
Then, we'll sail across the ocean and see how the Americas were conquered. In Europe looks westward.
Next, we'll watch as conquistadors dismantle powerful empires in Spanish conquest of the Americas.
Finally, we'll uncover the identity of a mummy in mysterious Maya Queen.
Clashing cultures, coming up next.
As you watch the first half of this program, keep these questions in mind.
What advantages helped Spain conquer the Aztecs?
What dangers did European explorers face in the New World?
Prosperous and sophisticated empires were thriving in Central and South America long before Spanish explorers ever set foot there. The Aztec Empire stretched far and wide across the Mexican plateau.
What are some of the good and bad things that happened to countries when they were discovered by Westerners?
You get an exchange of ideas, an exchange of material goods.
Cultural diffusion.
Certain farming tips.
Corn became really big in Europe because it was so easy to grow.
Government, organization, formatted societies, colonies, more people, diversity.
Europe brought over things to the Americas like disease.
A lot of cases there's been genocide where they've been killed.
Well, when Columbus came over, he was enslaving the Indians and putting them in pens.
So they kind of did an exchange of both good and bad.
Today, Mexico City is home to more than 20 million people. It is the capital of Mexico and its largest city. 500 years ago, another city stood on the same spot. That city was called Tenochtitlan, and it was the capital of the Aztec Empire. Tenochtitlan was founded in 1325 when the Aztecs came to the Valley of Mexico from their original homes farther north. Over time, the Aztecs became skilled engineers, architects, artists, mathematicians, and astronomers. They built Tenochtitlan, their masterpiece, on a marshy island on Lake Texcoco. The city was linked to the shore by 3 stone causeways. Since the water around the island was not drinkable, the Aztecs built aqueducts to bring in drinking water from nearby springs. About 200,000 people called the city home. It was dominated by an imposing temple that stood 12 stories high, El Templo Mayor. Here, the Aztecs held their most important religious ceremonies. Religion dominated Aztec society. The priesthood was a powerful political and social group. Most Aztecs believed that their lives depended on the goodwill of the gods, and the surest way to win the gods' favor was to make offerings to them. Human offerings. Human sacrifice was essential, for though man could not exist except through the creative force of the gods in turn needed man to sustain them with human sacrifice. Man must nourish the gods with the magic sustenance of life itself, found in human blood and in human hearts. The Aztecs believed that sacrificing humans to the gods was a necessary part of life. Every day, the priests climbed to the top of the temple and made an offering to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun. Aztec priests believed their offerings guaranteed that the sun would rise again the next day. They performed so many human sacrifices that the steps of the Templo Mayor became stained red. But the sacrifices were not just religious offerings. They also instilled fear in the enemies of the Aztec Empire, because most human sacrifices were prisoners who had been captured in the many battles the Aztecs fought against their neighbors. For more than 200 years, the Aztecs used military strength, diplomacy, and fear to forge an empire. Their land stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean and included almost 10 million subjects. Theirs was the largest and most powerful empire in Mesoamerica when a small army of Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1519. The Spanish wanted Aztec gold and fought with them for control of their empire. Within 6 years, the Spanish and their Indian allies would defeat the last Aztec king and bring down the empire, setting the stage for Spain's conquest of the rest of Mexico and making the city of Tenochtitlan a fading memory. Did you know? The Aztecs were doomed for destruction. They believed that the Spaniards were descended from their god, Quetzalcoatl, which gave the invaders a decided advantage. In addition, many rebellious Indian groups joined the Spaniards in their fight against Aztec rule.
After Columbus arrived in the Americas in the late 15th century, many European countries dispatched their explorers to the New World too. Their mission was to bring back gold and jewels and to lay claim to any land, regardless of its inhabitants.
Has there ever been a time when someone took something that belonged to you?
I felt very unhappy at first when my lacrosse stick was taken.
You see this coat? This is my favorite coat. And in the first few weeks of me wearing my coat, some of my friends would try to take it from me and wear it because they thought that it was cool or funny to just take my stuff.
My mom told me that she gave away some of my teddy bears to my cousins, and it was really disappointing because there was one special teddy bear. Its name is Fluffy.
During gym class, I had left my necklace in my locker, but when I found that someone had taken it, I was kind of let down.
This coat is like my personality, and I don't like people messing with my personality. I felt like they were attacking me.
In 1492, Christopher Columbus set sail from the coast of Spain and headed west across the Atlantic Ocean. His goal was to find a seagoing trade route to Asia. Instead, he reached islands in the Caribbean Sea, islands no European had set foot on before. He had landed in the New World. The Viking Leif Erikson had reached North America almost 500 years before. But Columbus's journey made a greater impact. When Columbus returned to Spain with news of gold and riches, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella quickly financed more trips. Eventually, Europeans realized that they were not exploring unknown parts of Asia, but were looking at a different land, an area that came to be called the Americas, and a mass movement of culture began. Europeans explored and settled in many parts of the Americas. They introduced new foods, plants, and animals to the Native Americans. They brought wheat, carrots, and rice, and cows, horses, and chickens. And Europeans learned about new plants such as corn, tomatoes, beans, and potatoes, and new animals like llamas and turkeys. Some of what the Europeans introduced had a devastating effect on Native Americans, though. The Europeans carried diseases that Native Americans had no immunity to fight. These new diseases killed millions of the native peoples. These deaths made it easier for conquistadors, explorer soldiers, to defeat Native American peoples and gain great riches. Hernan Cortés led his army of 500 conquistadors into Mexico in 1519. he was determined to set up a Spanish colony there. At first, relations between the conquistadors and Aztecs who lived in Mexico were friendly. But Cortés and his men wanted to seize the Aztecs' great wealth. In 1521, Cortés finally defeated the Aztecs and captured Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital city. In its place, he built what later became known as Mexico City. The conquistador Francisco Pizarro followed by defeating the Inca Empire in South America in the 1530s. He too won great wealth for Spain through this conquest. Spain was the first European country to claim land in the New World. But news of its success spread quickly. Soon, other countries sent their own adventurers to the Americas. Britain, France, and the Netherlands also wanted a share of the New World's wealth. They wanted it to increase the wealth and power of their own governments, and they had religious reasons. Britain and the Netherlands had joined the movement called the Reformation. They broke away from the Catholic Church. The Reformation caused deep divisions in Europe, and Britain and other Protestant countries became bitter rivals of Catholic countries like Spain. The French colonized land in Canada and in the Mississippi River Valley, growing wealthy from the fur trade with Native Americans. But in North America, as it happened farther south, Native Americans suffered from the arrival of these Europeans, as many people died from new diseases and the survivors found their ways of life disrupted. After Henry Hudson explored the land of New York State, the Dutch settled in a community called Fort Orange, and like the French, began trading with local Native American tribes for furs. The Dutch soon built more settlements in the area. They even purchased Manhattan Island, which would become the site of New York City, from Native Americans at a cost of $24. European countries continued sending exploration parties to the New World. The constant exchange of peoples and goods across the ocean would have lasting effects. You've been given all the information. Now it's your turn to discuss the questions. Take a moment to talk about the following.
What advantages helped Spain conquer the Aztecs?
What dangers did European explorers face in the New World?
If you'd like to learn more about what you've just seen, go online or check out these books at your local library.
As you watch the second half of this program, keep these questions in mind.
Why was Francisco Pizarro able to conquer the Inca Empire with little effort?
How did the Maya culture resemble European and ancient Egyptian cultures?
The Aztec and Inca empires were powerful and wealthy, but they oppressed many groups of people. These people helped the Europeans defeat the empires, and the Americas were changed forever.
Why is land important to people?
Land is important because that's where your home is, and your home is your sanctuary.
It gives you the chance to feel like you possess something and that no one can take it away from you, and it really gives you a feeling of stability.
Home is just like a place of comfort, you know? Just like when you're stressed out, you go back home, you can relax.
Home for me is basically my mother and my 3 brothers. We've always been together.
When I was little, I didn't have a chance to have the great home that some people do. And when I moved in with my dad, everything changed for me. And home just became this place where I knew I was safe.
Land doesn't really mean that much to me because as long as my mother and my brothers are with me, I'm completely fine.
In the early 1500s, Spain was determined to explore and colonize the rich and unknown New World of the Americas. Spain sent soldier adventurers called conquistadors to find riches and glory in this new land across the sea. One of these conquistadors was Hernán Cortés. He landed with 500 soldiers in what today is Mexico. The conquistadors' strange weapons, armor, and beasts instilled both awe and terror in the Native Americans they met. As a token of goodwill, one group of Native Americans gave Cortez gifts of gold and slaves. Among the slaves was the young woman Malitzin. Also known as Doña Marina, she became Cortez's interpreter. Doña Marina told Cortez much about the thriving Aztec Empire. She told him that the Aztecs controlled most of Mexico, that they often sacrificed their enemies to their gods, and that their capital city of Tenochtitlan was filled with unimaginable riches. Cortez resolved to take the Aztec city and its riches. Although outnumbered by the Aztecs, Cortez gained allies. During his march, he and his men were joined by fighters from many of the other native peoples the Aztecs had oppressed. The conquistadors also had an invisible ally, diseases such as smallpox that they carried with them unknowingly from Europe. Native Americans had never been exposed to these diseases. When they contracted these illnesses, thousands died. These deaths weakened the Aztecs. After a 3-month trek, Cortez entered Tenochtitlan in 1519. He confronted the Aztec ruler Moctezuma and boldly took him prisoner. Cortez kept Moctezuma in power as a puppet ruler, but the Spaniard held the real power in the land. Cortez helped himself to more than 100 tons of gold and countless gems and precious stones from the Aztecs. Meanwhile, the Aztecs grew restless. Finally, they revolted and forced Cortez to flee the city. But he regrouped and returned a year later with more Indian allies to retake the city. The once mighty Aztec capital was left in ruins. On its ashes, Cortez built a new Spanish city, which would one day become Mexico City. Cortez's success in Mexico was echoed in South America by another conquistador, Francisco Pizarro. Like Cortez, Pizarro dreamed of finding gold and glory in the New World. Arriving in Peru in 1531, he searched for the Incas. The Incas were reported to have great stockpiles of gold. Pizarro had about 170 soldiers, even fewer troops than Cortez had during his invasion of Mexico. But Pizarro learned that the Incas had been weakened by a recent civil war. This weakness gave him an advantage. During a meeting with the Inca ruler Atahualpa, Pizarro took him prisoner. The Incas paid a huge ransom to free their ruler. Pizarro took the riches, but had Atahualpa executed. Leaderless, the Incas fell into chaos. Over the next year, the Incas' internal fighting and Pizarro's ruthlessness and superior technology helped him defeat the empire. And, within just 2 decades, Spain's conquistadors had managed to destroy 2 great empires. Did you know? Hernán Cortés had been given the order to halt his expedition to Mexico many times because his superiors feared he would keep any riches for himself. But he ignored their orders, which they were powerless to enforce.
Scientists unearthed a female mummy buried in an ornate tomb. She was a woman of power, perhaps even a ruler of a powerful empire. State-of-the-art technology will help identify this Maya woman of mystery.
What do you think of when you imagine an empire?
Star Wars.
Like a reign of kings whose family and bloodline just made them the rulers. Like China and Britain.
I guess a school is like an empire.
Major corporations could be considered an empire.
I guess you could consider the United States a cultural empire.
The tobacco industries are huge empires.
In a couple of years, you're probably going to be able to find the Starbucks in Tibet.
Palenque, Mexico. A Maya kingdom like no other. European explorers discovered its remains almost a century ago, but Palenque still has many secrets. One in particular torments archaeologists and scientists alike: the identity and history of an unknown woman whose remains were uncovered in 1994. Her bones were covered in a red powder called cinnabar, so she was named the Red Queen of Palenque. If scientists could identify this mummy, it would be one of the greatest finds in Maya archaeological history and would shed light on the role of women in this ancient civilization. Vera Tisler is a bioarchaeologist. She blends science with the study of ancient civilizations. She was drawn to the mystery of the Red Queen, and she feels her studies may uncover her identity.
The information we have comes from a range of sources and is incomplete. Once we put all the pieces together, we will have a better understanding of the Red Queen's true identity.
Now, advanced DNA testing, carbon dating, and facial reconstruction will help Vera determine the lost identity of the Red Queen of Palenque. In 1994, scientists uncovered a mummy in the Maya city of Palenque in southern Mexico. The female mummy has been lying in a limestone sarcophagus for approximately 13 centuries. But her identity is a mystery. She is often referred to as the Red Queen of Palenque. Now bioarchaeologists are testing her bones and other artifacts from the tomb to find out who she was.
The discovery of the Red Queen really was an amazing find here in Palenque. It's one of the richest Maya tombs ever found. And really, the only thing comparable to it here at Palenque is Pacal's great tomb.
Pacal the Great ruled Palenque from approximately AD 603 to 683. He's responsible for increasing the city's political influence in the Maya kingdom. He commissioned some of the greatest artwork in Maya history. His tomb was discovered in 1952. Scientists hope it will help solve the mystery of the Red Queen.
Pacal's pyramid is really the focal point of this entire place. And so that association of the Red Queen with that pyramid, she's part of that equation. She's part of the center.
Pacal and the Red Queen's burial were similar because they were both covered in a red metallic powder called cinnabar.
And it was used really, I think, to adorn the dead body, to invest it with life. It's like the vision of blood. It's the same color, and the Mayas saw that symbolism. It's the same color they painted all of their temples with to give them life.
Not only were the bodies of Pacal the Great and the Red Queen swathed in successive layers of cinnabar, but they were each buried inside a sarcophagus at the heart of a temple. There are 3 candidates for the identity of the Red Queen. And the first candidate's picture is on Pacal's sarcophagus. Because of similar burials, scientists will test the DNA of Pacal the Great and the Red Queen to see if they were related. The first candidate is Yoliknal. She was in power from AD 583 to 604, and she was the first and only woman to rule Palenque. It is difficult to read the deteriorated carvings that show the succession of kings and queens of Palenque, but it is believed that she was the daughter of King Khan Balam I.
It could have been that there was a war. Palenque suffered a defeat that we don't know about. And so there was some break in the normal succession of kings. There could have been a dearth of male heirs at some point early on in Palenque's history.
A woman ruling a Maya kingdom was highly unusual in the 6th century.
The leaders of all of her people, the nobles, would have been principally represented by the men. So her court would have been made up principally of men, but the men would be her council, and they would defer to her. Now, the reason they would is because she was good at it. In the last analysis, dynastic succession can produce incompetent rulers or exceptional rulers, and Yoliknau must have been a great ruler.
Palenque was a powerful kingdom while Yoliknau ruled. This is evidence that she was a skilled leader during a time that men were usually in control. Scientists think Palenque started as a small farming hamlet around 100 BC, in the western edge of the Maya territory. The city grew rapidly thanks to its abundance of food. When Yoliknau took the throne, Palenque was the capital city of the Maya Empire. Yoliknau used her skill to lead Palenque in a great battle against its rival, Calakmul.
Palenque's biggest enemy was the kingdom of Calakmul, located far to the east. During the 6th century, the late 6th century, there was a tension that built up.
In order for enemy troops to actually enter into a city like Palenque, which is a citadel situated on a defensive location, you would have had to have had abject defeat of the main troops. And so when the troops of the enemy entered in, they probably entered in ready to desecrate the holy shrines of the city, to humiliate the ruling family, and to try to bring them under the heel of the enemy.
Carvings in Palenque tell archaeologists that this battle was devastating. But despite the damage, the kingdom managed to survive.
I think if we want to understand how a woman like Yoliknau performed as a ruler, as a leader in wartime, we have only to look at our modern world, at women who have ruled like Indira Gandhi, Golda Meir, in our own time, to see that women are perfectly good at ruling in time of war.
Yoliknau died in AD 604. She was considered a successful leader, but she died while Palenque was involved in the conflicts with Calakmul. Scientists will try to figure out if the Red Queen is the mummy of Yoliknau. Archaeologists will date the mummy as well as the artifacts around it, so their testing will be more accurate. When archaeologists excavated the Red Queen's temple, they found that it had been constructed in several phases over a 200-year period, from AD 500 to 700. But they were able to establish that the Red Queen was buried in the second phase of the construction, in the 7th century. The ceramics found alongside her sarcophagus confirmed the findings. Like any work of art, each ceramic sample has its own style unique to a period of time. This suggested that the Red Queen's tomb was built 50 to 100 years after the death of Yoliknal in 604. If she is the Red Queen, her bones would have had to be moved into her tomb after her death, which was a fairly common practice in ancient Maya burials. The Red Queen's skeleton will help determine if she is Yoliknal. There were other skeletons found in the Red Queen's tomb. An 8 to 10-year-old boy and a young woman were found next to her sarcophagus. Unlike the Red Queen, they were not covered in cinnabar. Minerals in water that seeped into the tomb preserved their bones in almost perfect condition. All the bones were sent to a laboratory in Miami to be dated. Archaeologists hope to confirm or refute the findings, which suggest that the Red Queen was buried around AD 700.
We received 3 bones for analysis, and one was bright red. It was a very unique sample. We knew there wasn't something quite right with this material, but there was no indications in any line of evidence that we were dealing with a problem. The only way to know is to actually date it and make the radiocarbon measurement to find out if you have a problem or not. The age of the Red Queen came out at 2500 BC, which was inconsistent with expectation. Well, in investigation in what might have happened or be going on here, it turns out that the Red Queen was subjected to some conservation and some conservation materials. And these are all petroleum derived in origin, therefore millions of years old. So if they are included in the analysis, the result's going to come out too old.
All hopes of establishing if the Red Queen is Yoliknal now rest with the 2 bodies that were found along with her sarcophagus. Scientists feel the Red Queen could be someone else. This candidate did not wear a crown, but she was still one of the most important women in Palenque's history. Her name was Zak Kook.
We have cases of women who were exceptionally powerful queens, and they never ruled in the dynasty, but we know that they were king makers. They made sure that their son, for example, went onto the throne and not some rival queen's son.
Zak Kook was probably the daughter of Hanab Pakal I. He was one of the 2 recognized rulers that appeared after Yoliknal's death. But Zak Kook did not go down in Palenque's history because of her ancestors. In the midst of the conflict with Calakmul in 603, she gave birth to what became Palenque's greatest king, Pakal II. Yet archaeologists believe she controlled the power in Palenque until her son was older.
Zak Kook clearly capitalized on the crisis to rule, as any great ruler does. I mean, this is not unusual. The way we measure greatness in rulers in any period of time is how they handle crisis. So Zak Kook was not exploiting the crisis to her own advantage. Her people genuinely needed leadership in that period, and she supplied it. If she had failed to supply it, that would not have been the history of Palenque.
In 615, Zak Kook handed the crown of Palenque to her son. So a 12-year-old boy became Palenque's 9th ruler. Zak Kook's role did not end with the coronation of her son.
Even though Pakal comes to power when he's 12 years old, it's really his mother who is the center of authority here at Palenque. We know that for a couple reasons, because there are really no records of Pakal or by Pakal for many, many years until after his mother really dies. He may be the king with the title. She's the one who is the real authority at that point.
In fact, evidence suggests that she was not only a queen mother, but that she was the regent who conducted the political affairs of the kingdom. DNA will reveal if the Red Queen was the mother of Palenque's greatest king. To establish if the Red Queen is related to Pakal the Great, bioarchaeologist Vera Tesler commissioned a DNA study of the bones. Although the cinnabar powder has preserved the Red Queen's remains, it makes it difficult to establish her identity. In fact, the cinnabar has bonded with the Red Queen's DNA. This process can be compared to throwing a handful of sand into cotton candy. The sand will stick to the strands of cotton candy, and if you throw enough at it and mix it together, the cotton candy will break. When the cinnabar stuck to the Red Queen's DNA strands, it fragmented them.
The length of DNA is important because the larger the length you get, the more information you'll get. In this case, with most ancient material as well, it's usually fragmented, so we usually have to spend a lot more time to get all those different fragments out to get the same piece of information.
Many in the Maya archaeological community think that the answer to the identity of the Red Queen can be found by studying Palenque's greatest king, Pakal II. In 626, about 10 years after his mother put him on the throne, Pakal married Zakbu Ahau. She is another potential candidate for the Red Queen. In the Maya civilization, royal wives were not only married young, but were also often the offspring of foreign dynasties set to forge new alliances.
The Maya queens that we know of from history tended to come from outside the kingdom. They were married into the dynasties, the local dynasties, from either conquered kingdoms or from allied kingdoms. It's the same thing that happened in medieval Europe, that happened with the Maya. So there was diplomatic ties that were really cemented through intermarriage, for example.
Zakbu Ahau's origins have been hard to pinpoint.
Some people think that she's from other places, but I really think it's a mystery still, you know, where she came from.
Scientific tests indicate that the Red Queen wasn't from Palenque either. Trace elements called strontium isotopes extracted from the Red Queen's teeth were compared to Palenque's geological profile. The results indicated differences in the levels of strontium isotopes found in Pakal. This suggested that she probably came from outside Palenque. Wherever Zakbu Ahau came from, it is likely that her marriage to Pakal was a political union to consolidate the kingdom and to produce heirs. But it took 9 years for Zakbu Ahau to complete her royal duty and produce heirs for her husband Pakal the Great. There are potential explanations for why Zakbu Ahau didn't produce an heir early in her marriage. One may be that many babies did not survive much beyond birth. However, 9 years after her marriage in 635, Zakbu Ahau produced an heir. 9 seemed to be her lucky number, since it took her another 9 years to produce a second heir. Both her sons later ruled Palenque. Evidence suggests that the Red Queen's identity is related to Pakal the Great, the most famous Maya king. In approximately AD 640, halfway through his reign, Pakal focused his efforts on constructing his memorial. It is believed that a crypt was carved into the bedrock where the king's sarcophagus was later installed. Then the pyramid was built around it. The shrine at the top was connected to the funerary chamber by an internal stairway 25 meters long. It would be sealed after his death by rubble, which would take 4 years to remove when his tomb was discovered. Scientists think that the Red Queen's tomb was constructed around the same time.
I think the location of the Red Queen's tomb in a building right next to Pakal's burial pyramid is the most important clue we have to identifying who it is. It's a really strong indication that it had to have been someone with close family ties to Pakal.
His wife, Zakbu Ahau, did not live to see her kingdom in all its magnificence. She passed away in 672, and her husband died 11 years later after ruling for nearly 70 years.
He became so powerful, and he lived for so long, that Palenque's identity became really his own, and vice versa. Palenque, for years to come, would see itself as the place of Pakal. All of his sons, his grandchildren, really went back to Pakal as the great figure in Palenque history.
Berit Tesler, the bioarchaeologist who has been trying to identify the Red Queen of Palenque since 1997, believes that Pakal's wife was the best candidate. She had a two-dimensional facial reconstruction built that was based on the mummy's skull. Then she compared it to the portraits of the leading female dignitaries of Palenque, including Zakbu Ahau. The facial reconstruction of the Red Queen's skull does bear a resemblance to Zakbu Ahau's stucco representation. But Tesler's theory depends on the reliability of the portraits made in Palenque.
The art of Palenque is remarkable because it is the only place in the Maya world, in the Mesoamerican world that I know of, where you can recognize people by their portraits. The artists here were taking images from life of the kings and modeling them in plaster and carving them in 2 dimensions on stone. It's so accurate that we can look at a face that's fallen off of a pyramid from a statue, and we can recognize who it is. The artists, even after the king was dead, could represent the king by the portraits.
Karen Taylor is one of the world's leading forensic artists, and she has been asked to help fulfill Tesler's wish. Taylor is also a consultant to the FBI and has worked with the Austin police force to identify murder victims. Soon Tesler will be able to look at the face of the Red Queen. The original skull is too fragile to be manipulated for the length of time required by a facial reconstruction. So a CAT scan was done and then used by an imaging company to develop a reproduction, which was sent to Taylor's workshop. The process of developing a soft tissue face begins with the application of tissue depth markers on specific locations of the skull. Anthropologists have developed tables of average tissue thicknesses from different ancestral groups as references. Once the markers are applied, it becomes a matter of connecting the dots. The skull itself gives the architecture for the overall forms of the face. Then Taylor will use a specific formula for each feature. She continues working on the Red Queen's face. In the meantime, the carbon dating tests conducted in Miami have finally produced results. The first body is estimated to be from AD 540 to 660. The second body is believed to be from AD 650 to 780. Now scientists can determine that the Red Queen lived between AD 620 and 680. Tesler can eliminate Yoliknal from the list of candidates. She was Palenque's first female ruler, but she died in 604, some 15 to 66 years earlier than the carbon dating results. While scientists wait for further results to determine the identity of the Red Queen, Vera Tesler travels to Austin, Texas, to see the face Karen Taylor has created.
Wow. Amazing. I can see her. This is really incredible. Well, she has this outthrusting features that you would expect with her cranial deformations. Amazing.
Especially her lower face is prognathic, I thought.
Yeah, she's kind of mouthy, prognatic in this part.
I also tried to look at the drawing that you did, that linear drawing.
Yeah. I recognize that if we, yeah, it's very close.
Particularly the neck was complicated for me to figure out because I'd never dealt with obviously a modern individual with this kind of compressed skull, and I had to look at the markings for the muscles on the nuchal line here too.
Morphology is probably completely different.
The Red Queen now has a face, and science may soon give her a name. It took 2 years and countless extraction attempts, but Carney Matheson has succeeded in comparing the Red Queen's DNA to Pakal's. Vera Tesler is moments away from getting the answer to a riddle that has taken her thousands of kilometers away from Palenque.
But from these two examples, you can see when we sequence the DNA, we'll get these different peaks, and this is called an electropherogram. And on this peak here, like this green colour here, for example, would be an A, and the red colour would be a T. And so if we have a look along here, we can see, because I've got two sequences there, we can see the difference between the two sequences. And that's what we use to identify the polymorphisms. Once we identify the polymorphisms, we can then say, well, these sequences differ, or this sequence is the same. So here we have Pakal, and here we have the Red Queen. And you can see if you look along here, this peak here is not found in this sequence here.
Yeah,
so we have a difference there. And because they have different numbers of polymorphisms, and because they're actually in different positions, it means that they just could not be related maternally. So they can't be mother and child, they can't share the same mother, and that type of relationship is not possible.
So that's excluded by that?
That's correct, yeah. Those two types of relationships can be excluded. And if they're not related, I guess the possibility of them being married together would be one option.
So basically we can exclude with that result that the Red Queen was the mother or the grandmother of Pakal, or any sister.
Or even a sister, correct.
Amazing.
Yeah,
that's important.
Good, good. Well, I'm glad we can help you with that. So.
Wow, that's exciting.
The final results of the DNA tests rule out any family links between the Red Queen and Pakal the Great of Palenque. Zach Kook, who put her son on the throne, can also be eliminated from the list of candidates. There is one name left. The mystery of the Red Queen of Palenque has taunted archaeologists and scientists alike. Translations of the glyphs on Palenque's monuments and recent scientific developments have helped determine the mummy's identity. Yoliknal was ruled out by the carbon dating results, which suggest that the Red Queen was buried between 15 to 65 years after Yoliknal's own death. Zach Kook was ruled out by stable isotopes and mitochondrial DNA studies. Zakbu Ahau, Pakal's wife, is the only candidate left. Just like the Red Queen, Zakbu Ahau came from outside Palenque. If epigraphers are right, she was in her teens when she married Pakal in 626. She had 3 children over a period of 22 years before she died in her late 50s, which is consistent with the estimated age of the Red Queen. Now scientists have a tentative name for the Red Queen, Zakbu Ahau, wife of Pakal the Great, mother of 2 more rulers, and grandmother of the last of Palenque's great kings. Archaeologists can turn the page on one chapter of their investigation, but most scientists want the findings confirmed. Unfortunately, most of Palenque's history is unknown. As scientists uncover more remains, they will better understand the past of this great Maya city. Nearly 100 years after the Red Queen died, the Maya civilization, including Palenque, went into an irreversible decline. An ecological disaster, wars, and dynastic struggles are blamed for the exodus from the great Maya cities. Palenque was probably abandoned at the beginning of the 9th century. That's when the records of building and dynasty stopped, and when the jungle grew over the remains of the Red Queen.
I lived in a time like no other. A time which saw my civilization flourish and accomplish far more than the Incas and the Aztecs ever would. I watched our architects and artists build one of the greatest cities of the Maya civilization, one that would have at its zenith over 1,500 buildings, all more splendid than the other. I saw our people go to war and fight for our supremacy in the region. I witnessed our kingdom become a force to be reckoned with, and I saw my world change as the seeds of our demise were sown into a land that had nourished us for nearly 2,000 years. I was Queen of Palenque.
You've been given all the information. Now it's your turn to discuss the questions. Take a moment to talk about the following.
Why was Francisco Pizarro able to conquer the Inca Empire with little effort?
How did the Maya culture resemble European and ancient Egyptian cultures?
We hope you've enjoyed this assignment discovery journey into Mesoamerica. If you'd like to learn more about what you've just seen, go online or check out these books at your local library.